At 0500, Major Natalie Raines was already on mile 3 of her morning run along the perimeter fence at Fort Liberty. The summer air was damp, her cadence even, breathing controlled, her boots striking pavement with the same precision she'd honed through 2 decades in uniform. The base around her remained mostly quiet, but she knew within an hour it would be a hive of drills, chow calls, and movement briefs. She slowed to a jog near the north gate, glanced at her GPS watch, and began her cool-down lap toward the intelligence center. Sweat darkened the back of her PT shirt, but her posture stayed upright, purposeful. At 42, she could still run circles around many of the younger lieutenants on base. By 0545, she'd showered, changed into her OCPs, and was seated at her secure terminal with a mug of black coffee. Her attention locked on a pattern she'd flagged in a batch of SIGINT reports. From northern Syria, unit movements didn't match satellite tracking. Supply convoys vanished without leaving an electronic footprint. Something wasn't adding up. She pulled the files into a shared analysis folder, attaching her preliminary notes and cross-referencing them with HUMINT, dispatches from the last 3 weeks. The inconsistencies weren't just tactical. They hinted at gaps in communication chains. She leaned back slightly, trying to see the whole picture. At 0620, her junior officer, First Lieutenant Kim, stepped into the room quietly, eyes flicking to her screen before speaking. Colonel Danner requested you in his office immediately. No briefing context was provided. Natalie blinked once, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Understood. She stood, smoothed the front of her blouse, and slid her CAC card into her sleeve pocket. The walk across base took 7 minutes, long enough for her instincts to rise. Something was wrong. Colonel Danner wasn't prone to abrupt meetings, and he certainly didn't summon majors without cause. Inside headquarters, his assistant didn't speak, just waved her through. That never happened. Danner sat at his desk, General Cotter seated beside him. Both men stared, not speaking. A third man stood near the blinds, dressed in civilian attire, arms crossed. Natalie halted 2 steps in. At ease, Danner said without inflection. She didn't move. Sir? His eyes shifted. Then he slid a red-bordered folder across the desk. Effective immediately. You are relieved of duty. Orders approved by U.S. Army Intelligence Command. Your clearance is revoked. You are to surrender your weapon and all access materials. Discharge classification is pending. She didn't hear the rest. Not really. Her ears rang as if after a flashbang. For a few seconds she couldn't feel her hands. 20 years. Iraq, Afghanistan, multiple joint ops, commendations, her bronze stars, the day she pulled 3 injured Marines out of a collapsed compound with no backup. Her hands rested behind her back, stiff. Sir, I respectfully request a reason. General Cotter didn't meet her eyes. This matter is sealed under Section 7 National Security Guidelines. You will not be given further explanation. Her mouth opened, then closed. The civilian stepped forward, removing a badge from his coat pocket. His tone lacked any affect. Turn in your ID and sidearm. You must vacate the base by 1800. Failure to comply will result in detainment. She reached slowly into her chest pocket and removed her CSC, then unfastened her sidearm. It rested in her palm for a moment longer than needed. M9 Beretta, issued after her last requel. She handed it over, grip first. Cotter dismissed her without another word. Just like that. Walking down the hall, she heard nothing. It wasn't quiet, but it felt like silence. Soldiers passed her in the corridor. Some glanced her way and quickly looked down. Others veered toward side doors. Her face had changed in their minds. Whatever they'd been told, it was enough to make her untouchable. In her quarters, she packed with mechanical efficiency. Her duffel filled quickly. PT gear. Dress uniforms she would never wear again. A few awards. A framed photo of her former team outside a secure FOB in Al-Assad. Her fingers hovered there. Staff Sergeant James Wilson stood behind her in the photo, smiling like they hadn't just survived an ambush hours earlier. By 11:15, she stood at admin processing. A specialist behind the desk didn't look up as he printed forms. Sign here. Acknowledge forfeiture of benefits pending review. Natalie signed without comment. The clerk cleared his throat, voice suddenly lower. I'm sorry, ma'am. She nodded once, a controlled breath holding everything else inside. Outside, the skies had darkened. Rain began falling in slow, soaking sheets as she walked across the main quad. Her boots splashed in the forming puddles. A security detail shadowed her at 50 yards. No sirens, no lights, but they were watching her like a prisoner. She paused at the memorial wall, where her name was etched beneath a citation for valor. She'd led an extraction under heavy fire, saving 12 civilians and 3 American contractors. She remembered the screams, the sand, the red flares above the compound as she radioed coordinates with blood on her vest. At 12:00, she reached the main gate. The MP on duty was a corporal she'd mentored 2 years ago. He avoided her gaze as he cut her ID card in half and dropped the pieces into a shred bin. "Procedure for dishonorable discharge," he mumbled. He didn't salute. Neither did she. As she stepped through the gate, the rain intensified. Her duffel dug into her shoulder. She had no vehicle. Her base access was gone. 7 miles to the nearest bus depot. No civilian clothes. Just a decorated officer stripped of identity. The water soaked her blouse, but she kept walking. Her back straight, eyes forward. She had no plan, no explanation. Only questions, pain, and the fading echo of 20 years of service taken in a single hour. And somewhere deep in her gut, something worse. The suspicion that this wasn't a mistake. That someone wanted her gone, and they'd made it look clean. The rain didn't ease as Natalie walked the perimeter road beyond the main gate. Her boots squelched with each step along the gravel shoulder. The duffel bag biting into her shoulder, water soaking through to her skin. A thin mist hung over the tree line beyond the wire fence, and every mile of this stretch felt like a slow exile from the world she'd built. She hadn't made it a mile when she sensed movement behind her. Subtle at first, a second security vehicle appeared farther down the road, moving slowly. Lights off. The same MP detail from the gate was still trailing, now doubled. Her instincts sharpened. This wasn't just protocol. Then she heard it. A low thumping beyond the trees, rhythmic, building. The unmistakable sound of rotor blades pushing air. Not a medevac. Not a training flight. This came in fast. Too low. From the wrong vector for Fort Liberty's designated approach lanes. Natalie turned and stepped off the road into the grass just as the helicopter broke over the tree line. A UH-60 Blackhawk. Matte black skin, no markings, no tail number visible. It hovered just beyond the perimeter fence, 70 yards out. Nose angled directly toward her. The MPs behind her had already drawn weapons. One was speaking urgently into his radio, his voice swallowed by the roar of the rotors. Natalie stood still, watching the aircraft, squinting through the rain. Her heart pounded once, hard, like it had in Kandahar before the mortar strikes. Base sirens activated at 12:48. The wail echoed across the parade grounds behind her. Security vehicles peeled from multiple directions. She could see their headlights flashing through the rain. A rapid response team took position behind concrete barriers. Rifles trained toward the sky. Then the side window of the Blackhawk opened. A figure leaned out, helmet on, visor down, but the movement was familiar. He raised a hand in signal. Slow, deliberate. Her breath caught. She stepped 1 pace forward. The pilot looked at her again, and even through the rain, she knew that profile, knew the lines of that jaw, the set of his shoulders, the slight tilt of his head when waiting on orders. Captain Elijah Ross, dead 3 years ago, or so she'd been told. The base commander's SUV skidded into view, stopping just short of the gate. Colonel Danner emerged, binoculars raised toward the Blackhawk. General Cotter followed, jaw clenched, talking rapidly into a secure SATCOM handset. Natalie didn't move. Her hands remained visible, fingers relaxed, not challenging, not retreating. Her mind raced. This wasn't a rescue mission, not officially. It was too fast, too exact, and entirely off protocol. An order was barked behind her, one she didn't quite catch. A younger MP started toward her position, sidearm drawn but lowered. Then a voice from Danner's direction called him off. The colonel walked closer to the fence, shouted something toward the helicopter. The side door opened slowly. Another figure stepped out in full tactical gear, crouched against the downwash. They held a device shaped like a directional transmitter, a signal, a challenge code, something encrypted and specific. General Cotter's secure phone rang again. He turned his back to the fence as he listened. He responded with a single word, authenticate. Then silence. Then confirmed. Everything shifted in seconds. Colonel Danner turned and looked at Natalie with an expression she'd never seen from him. Not suspicion, not control, almost respect. He gave a curt order, and one of the MPs moved to unlock the side maintenance gate. The corporal paused at the latch, uncertain. Danner nodded. Do it. The metal gate creaked open. Rain puddled at Natalie's feet. She stepped forward, pausing just outside the perimeter. Cotter walked to her without expression, voice loud over the rotors. It seems there's been a change. You're needed elsewhere. She didn't speak, didn't trust her voice. He looked at her, just for a second. then raised his right hand in a formal salute. It wasn't protocol. Not for a discharged officer, not after the ID was cut in half, but he saluted anyway. She returned it, sharply, out of instinct, then picked up her duffel and crossed the threshold. Past the wire, past the MPs who had followed her like a shadow. The rotor wash kicked rain into her face as she approached the aircraft. The crew chief inside offered a hand. She took it. He pulled her aboard and slid the door closed as the aircraft banked away from Fort Liberty. The lights of the base blurred through the mist. She strapped in, boots braced against the floor, trying to steady her breathing. Across from her, the pilot removed his helmet. Elijah Ross, eyes clear, face calm, but lined with fatigue. He spoke over the comms, voice flat with urgency. "Sorry for the pickup. Major. We didn't have time for anything cleaner." She couldn't respond yet, couldn't absorb that he was sitting there, alive, that she'd just been extracted from her own base in an unmarked bird flown by. A man listed as KIA. The aircraft cut northwest into restricted airspace. No tail number, no flight path, just a Blackhawk in the storm, carrying the one person Fort Liberty had just erased. The helicopter banked west, then north, following a low contour through dense Carolina pine forest. No tower communications, no beacon signal. Natalie sat opposite Ross, still watching him in disbelief. He didn't speak again, just piloted with practiced economy, eyes forward, grip steady. At 1327, the Blackhawk dropped behind a tree line and hovered above what looked like an abandoned paper mill. Faded metal roofs, rusted vents, a cracked loading bay swallowed by vines. But as they touched down, she saw the subtle edges of new concrete buried beneath the weeds. Someone had spent serious money making this place look forgotten. A pair of men in civilian tactical gear approached as the side door opened. They carried suppressed carbines and wore no insignia. One nodded to Ross, then to Natalie, and gestured toward the main building. No words were exchanged, no salutes, just controlled movement, as if every second was rehearsed. Inside, the illusion dropped. Cool air swept past motion sensors. Steel security doors clicked open with biometric scanners. Surveillance feeds displayed high-res thermal imaging of surrounding forest. A full-spectrum ops center glowed with servers, comms, and tactical overlays. Colonel Maddox waited at the far end, gray hair cut sharp, uniform crisp but without name tape or unit patch. He extended a hand without fanfare. "Welcome to Site 7. Major, you're safe. For now?" Natalie didn't shake his hand. She wasn't ready for that. She wanted answers, not greetings. Maddox nodded slightly, as if he'd expected that. "Follow me. We have a lot to cover." They moved through a secure corridor toward an inner briefing room. As they walked, he started speaking, voice low but direct. "You were never meant to be exposed, but you flagged something that crossed a line. Someone in your chain saw it, and your name got flagged at Command East." She stopped walking. "You're saying my discharge was staged?" Maddox paused with her Project Lazarus. Deep cover contingency for compromised officers at risk of being silenced. You triggered the protocol when your intel package hit a node we were already monitoring. She stared at him. "So you destroyed my record to protect me?" "No. We faked a dishonorable to trigger the other side's response. It worked. They moved fast, faster than expected. Your life was in real danger by 10 Sunward this morning." They entered a briefing room where a digital map showed Fort Liberty's command hierarchy. Red icons marked locations she recognized, offices, servers, even her old unit hub. Maddox gestured to a screen. "We saw unusual communication patterns from Fort Liberty's J2 element to Shadow, contacts in Bahrain and Ankara. We suspected leaks but couldn't confirm the vector. Until you flagged those Syrian anomalies." Natalie pulled her arms across her chest. Her pulse had steadied, but her stomach still burned. "You made me a pariah. I walked off that base in the rain with a gun to my back. It wasn't personal. It was tactical. We needed them to believe they won, and that you were neutralized. You're alive because we acted first." Ross stepped into the room then, helmet tucked under one arm. Maddox nodded toward him. "We brought him back from the dead for this op. You were the second piece of the plan." She looked at Ross. His face held no apology, only purpose. Maddox continued, "If we didn't pull you today, odds are you'd be dead by tonight. You were getting too close without knowing it. That made you a threat. They wanted to erase you." She exhaled slowly, hands on her hips, gaze locked on the glowing screen. Everything she'd built had been a lie by design, but the lie had saved her. And somewhere deep inside, a colder truth settled. Someone in Fort Liberty had tried to have her erased by her own side, and whoever they were, they hadn't finished yet. The screen changed as Maddox tapped a control panel beside the table. New files opened, each stamped with red classification bands and time-stamped logs. One showed mission briefings from 2020 in northern Syria, Operation Delphi. Natalie remembered it well. It was supposed to be a low-risk recon support with embedded special operations. 6 American personnel were killed. One listed as MIA, Captain Elijah Ross. She turned toward him. He stood silently, arms crossed, watching the feed without flinching. Maddox pointed to a data column on the left. The op was compromised. Our team went in blind. The enemy was waiting. Someone with top-tier clearance fed movement intel to a third-party network. A mole inside. Natalie stepped closer to the monitor. Ross spoke then, voice even. We faked my death to bait out whoever passed the intel. They needed a body. They got one. Not mine. He blinked once. Our team got chewed up. Natalie. I survived only because we deviated from the op route last second. You know how rare that is. She studied the screen, watching layers of emails, message logs, internal routing slips. One flagged item was her own recent analysis. The anomaly she found 2 days ago. Maddox shifted beside her. When you flagged that movement pattern, we realized the breach hadn't been closed. In fact, the leak was still active. And you were close, too close. That's why they burned me. Her voice was low now. It wasn't just punishment. It was suppression. Maddox nodded once. They couldn't risk a formal reprimand. Too many eyes. So they took the fast route. Remove your clearance. Strip your status. Make sure no one would listen to anything you said again. She looked at her own name on a secure message chain. A senior officer discussed her reassignment in coded language. Terminate access. Discredit if escalated. That line hit harder than the discharge itself. Ross stepped forward. That's when Maddox brought up Lazarus. We needed you, Natalie, not just to protect you, to lead. You know the chain of command. You know the personalities, the rhythms of how Liberty operates. They won't see you coming. She turned toward him fully now, her jaw tight. You want me to go back in? Maddox answered this time, not as a soldier, as the commander of Operation Phoenix. Your job will be to dismantle the compromised command from inside the system, quietly, precisely, before they disappear for good. The room held still. The glowing monitors cast reflections across her boots. Every instinct inside her screamed for distance. Self-preservation, but something steadier pulled stronger. The same code that had gotten her this far. No one else would understand the terrain like she did. No one else had both motive and knowledge. What if I say no? Maddox didn't blink. Then you disappear. Not in the system. Not even here. We find someone else, but it'll take weeks. And we lose the initiative. Natalie took a breath, closing her eyes for just a second. She thought of her team, the ones still serving under blind orders. She thought of Wilson, of Ross in a fake body bag, and of how close they came to killing her without firing a shot. When do we start? The words left her mouth quiet but solid. Ross nodded once. Maddox tapped the console again. Right now. Your team's already here. They're waiting on a plan, and on you. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen shifted to tactical layouts. She stepped forward. No hesitation now, no turning back, only forward. At 15:35, Natalie stood at the front of the briefing room. A digital map of Fort Liberty projected behind her. The layout showed the command compound, comms center, and the secure data vault buried beneath the eastern wing. Red overlays indicated known security patrols, while green markers flagged blind zones and tunnel access points. Everyone in the room was watching her, not with deference but with assessment. This was her mission now. She pointed to the server farm location beneath the admin structure. Purge begins at 06:00. We have a 12-hour window to get in, extract everything, and get out clean. If that data disappears, so does our proof. And the network walks. A former Delta operator leaned forward. Entry point Elijah stepped in from the side, clicking the display to shift. A forgotten storm culvert feeds into an old maintenance shaft beneath the east. Comms building. The access panel hasn't been on the engineering register for years. We can bypass exterior patrols if we time it with a shift rotation between 1:00 and 01:30, Natalie nodded. I'll take Torres with me. She knows encryption protocols and internal server structure. Elijah tapped a section on the perimeter map. My team creates a controlled diversion at the East Fuel Depot. Nothing that causes real damage. Just noise and flash, enough to pull security east. A logistics analyst raised a hand. That'll split QRF in 3 directions. Maintenance teams will assume it's a power short, unless you force a hard response. Elijah smirked. That's the plan. Controlled chaos. We don't want the whole base red, just confused. Natalie shifted the screen again. She tapped a small access door beneath a substation marked Echo 3. This is our ingress. It's out of CCTV range for 17 minutes each cycle. We'll enter at 0047, navigate 400 meters through maintenance corridors, and reach the vault by 0120. She turned to the group. The vault has dual-factor clearance, but I know the override procedures for biometric lockouts. In an emergency, base command stores fallback access keys in secure channels. She paused. And our inside contact has those keys. No one asked who. Elijah said it anyway. Master Sergeant Donovan. He's been keeping his head down, but he flagged us the moment they pulled Natalie's file. He's clean. Always has been. One of the techs checked her tablet. The purge scripts were scheduled through Command East's internal net. That means even if we interrupt the wipe, we'll only have minutes before failsafes lock us out. Torres looked up. I'll have a burn-to-scan protocol loaded. It extracts volatile system packets as they're accessed. No time for full disk copy, but we'll get the critical logs. Natalie turned toward the team. This isn't a kill mission. It's containment. We identify the node leaders, recover proof, and walk out. No flags. No noise beyond what the diversion gives us. The team looked between each other, then back at her. She didn't blink. No pep talk, no emotion, just precision. Elijah checked his watch. If we're going in, we need to prep in the next hour. Gear, uniforms, comms discipline. Natalie stepped away from the display. Then let's move. Everything starts at 00. Nobody improvises. We stay clean. We stay quiet, or this whole thing burns. At 0047, Natalie and Torres moved silently through the drainage culvert east of Fort Liberty. The tunnel was just under 4 feet high and slick with runoff. They wore standard-issue utility coveralls, unmarked. With gear sealed tight in waterproof packs, Natalie took the lead, headlamp off, using a thermal scope to check each bend before stepping forward. The signal from Ross came through a single burst tone in her earpiece. Diversion initiated. Showtime. They reached the substation service hatch at 0056. Torres bypassed the access panel with a portable decryptor keyed to the site's legacy firmware. After 30 seconds, the lock gave a soft click. Natalie opened it just wide enough to scan the hallway beyond. Empty. No motion signatures. They slipped through and sealed the hatch behind them. Inside the maintenance wing, lights were dimmed for night cycle. Natalie navigated by muscle memory, staying off the central corridor. Every 90 seconds, Torres relayed timing for surveillance camera sweeps. They reached the stairwell to sublevel 2 at 0113. From there, it was a direct shot to the server vault. One fire door, one biometric pad. Natalie opened her encrypted comm and sent a 3-burst tone. A second later, Donovan's code came through in clear text. Sierra November 50 Alpha 2. She typed it in manually. The green light blinked once, then the door unlocked. They were in. The server room was colder than expected. Fluorescent strips bathed rows of racks in sterile light. Torres moved fast, removing a reinforced drive from her pack and connecting it to the primary hub. Natalie kept watch at the mainframe, watching for internal comm alerts or door breaches. At 0118, the overhead lights flicked to red. A mechanical chime echoed twice. Then the intercom crackled on. General Kessler's voice came sharp and clear, tight with control. Lockdown protocol activated. Unauthorized system access detected. Server purge now scheduled for 0130. All personnel secure primary terminals immediately. Natalie's pulse didn't jump. She keyed her comm. Command. We've been flagged. Advise fallback. Maddox came back instantly. No fallback. Stay in. Extract what you can. Ross is inbound with recovery. Torres was already pulling file chains into her terminal. This isn't a clean interface. They've layered data masking over the comms logs. I'll get the backups, but I need time. Natalie checked the central status panel. Security teams had shifted. A patrol was now en route to sublevel 2. ETA under 8 minutes. She moved to the auxiliary door and set a charge pack low yield. Remote trigger. If they had to exfil in a rush, the blast would cover their movement. At 0122, Torres called out, "We're in the node logs. Encryption keys match Kessler's terminal signatures. This confirms it." Natalie turned. "Then copy fast, because we're about to have company." The purge counter began flashing red on the system panel. 8 minutes. Torres's fingers moved across the keys. Sweat glistened on her brow despite the cold air. Natalie watched the hallway monitor. No movement yet, but it was coming. When Torres finally said done, it was 0126. Natalie yanked the drive and sealed it in the transport case. They backtracked into the stairwell just as a 2-man security team entered. The corridor below, she pulled Torres against the wall, waited for the footsteps to pass, then signaled with a flick of her hand. At 0129, they reached the exit hatch. A single tone in her comm signaled extraction was inbound. The server data was secure. Now all they had to do was get out alive. At 0131, the secondary corridor alarms cut through the stairwell like a knife. Natalie checked the hallway again. No visual on the team that just swept the sublevel. They needed to be gone before backup closed the loop. Torres was breathing fast but steady, her grip tight on the sealed drive. Natalie gave a single nod. Time to vanish. They backtracked down a utility shaft not marked on the main blueprints. An older maintenance tunnel that hadn't been logged since the last base. Retrofit in 2015. Ross had found it on an old civil engineering map. At 0139, they emerged through a storm grate near the abandoned motor pool. A blacked-out SUV waited 40 yards down the dirt access lane. Donovan stood at the driver's side. He didn't wave, just popped the rear hatch and checked his watch. 1 minute early, Natalie and Torres dove into the rear cabin. No lights, no chatter. Donovan turned the vehicle around without headlights, following a preset GPS track through unmonitored scrubland. No roads, no records. At 0217, they crossed the tree line and reached the second fallback site. Ross waited there, already unrolling comm cables and decrypt rigs. The room inside was little more than a concrete box with a diesel generator, humming in the back. Torres handed off the drive without a word. The extraction was complete. Now came the real test. Natalie paced near the far wall as Ross began running data validation. The room filled with the quiet rhythm of keys tapping and server fans whirring. Then the screen lit up. Layered access logs, chain routing headers, satellite relay points rerouted through non-military IP blocks. And there, embedded deep in a command signature file, Kessler's login. Torres pointed to the confirmation string. That's the same key used in the 2020 Syria wipe. It matches the signature block from Delphi. Natalie leaned in. The files had been routed through a masked protocol chain to a dead logistics. Node listed in Ramstein. The node wasn't dead. It was still active. Masked. Reused. Ross brought up the next file set. An internal memorandum from a closed session inside Defense Liaison West. Kessler had argued for deeper surveillance authority. He framed it as anti-insider threat security, but the language was skewed. His arguments cited anomaly reports Natalie herself had filed years earlier. He'd been watching her that long. Then a name surfaced, hidden in a PDF timestamp chain, embedded in internal encryption tags. A code word, Chairman. Torres ran it through the compartmentalization matrix. Not a project title, a code name. The server had pulled fragments of communications routed through civilian embassies, third nation proxies, private defense contractors. The chairman wasn't a single person. He was a node controller, and Kessler had answered to him. Natalie stared at the screen, her arms folded. The purge wasn't just to hide a failed op. It was the last step in erasing a paper trail that connected half a dozen officers to a live intelligence channel built on American servers. The network wasn't gone. It was growing, hidden under layers of false authority and rerouted legitimacy. At 0305, Ross turned. His face was hard now. We have what we need to burn Kessler. But if we do, the rest of this network disappears. They'll ghost before morning. We hit him now. We lose the rest. Natalie's jaw tightened. She felt the pressure not in her shoulders, but in her chest. This wasn't just justice. This was leverage. She stepped back from the screen. Not yet. We let him think he's safe. We track the rest. Pull the network apart one piece at a time. She turned toward Donovan, who nodded slowly. And when we move clean. By 0400, the site was silent again. The data backed up. Files encrypted and duplicated. Natalie stood in the doorway as the sun began to rise behind the trees. The betrayal had stripped her once. But now, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was hunting. The letter came through an encrypted channel at 0542. Subject line clearance restoration. Immediate. Natalie read it once, then again. Sitting alone at the corner table in the war room, the words were sterile but undeniable. Rank restored. Security level Sierra 5 reissued. All disciplinary actions expunged from permanent record. Attached was a scanned directive signed by the Director of National Intelligence himself. She stared at the signature longer than she expected. By 0700, a convoy of black Suburbans rolled into the extraction compound. No ceremony, just orders. She stepped into the rear seat of the lead vehicle. A two-star general nodded to her. No salute, not here, but a gesture of respect. They drove south, then east, toward a federal transition center built behind a classified range near Quantico. At 10:15, she stepped onto a plain concrete floor inside a restricted wing. There was no flag, no music, just a simple stand, one file folder, and 4 people in civilian dress. The Director of National Intelligence stood nearest. He offered his hand, and this time, she took it. He didn't speak long. No politics, just clarity. You saw what others missed. You held the line. And now we need that more than ever. He handed her the folder. Inside were 3 documents. The first was her formal reinstatement. The second was an assignment summary. The third was a private memo, not marked for distribution. It laid out the scope of her new task, Operation Harbinger, a multilateral counterintelligence directive to dismantle embedded espionage, operations across military and civilian structures. The chairman's network wasn't isolated. It was rooted across 6 agencies and 3 contractor groups. She would lead the new task force. Autonomous, classified, answerable only to the DNI. She left the room at 10:42, not with applause, just with quiet purpose. Outside, Torres waited with a secure laptop. The data dump from the previous op had already triggered internal audits. 3 resignations, 2 sealed indictments. Kessler's name was no longer spoken in official comms. He had vanished off the grid at 0410, but now they had a pattern and a list. At 13:00, she reported to the new unit's provisional headquarters. Half the building still smelled of fresh paint. The team was small, 9 personnel, all vetted, some former operators, some intel analysts, 1 former cyber asset who hadn't used her real name in 7 years. They worked without emblems. No formal insignia, just silent agreement. Natalie stood before them, hands behind her back. She didn't speak of redemption or pride, just the task ahead. Every asset compromised, every comm rerouted, every shadow with a badge. They would track them, isolate them, and end their run. She gave the team 3 days to build full intel profiles on the remaining. Links from Kessler's data ring? At 15:26, she was alone in the operations center. The room buzzed softly with cooling fans and soft data tones. She stood beside a digital map that tracked international data traffic by breach risk index. Red pulsed softly over 5 zones. She touched each one with a fingertip. Not hesitation, not fear, just focus. She had walked out of Fort Liberty marked and erased. Now she was the one doing the hunting. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like duty, only quieter, sharper, without the banners and the ranks, just the truth, carried forward by someone who refused to stay quiet. And this time, they would not see her coming. At 05:59, the wind shifted east across the parade grounds at Fort Liberty. Natalie stood alone on the overlook, boots planted on frost-cracked pavement, arms crossed as the first line of sun crept over the horizon. No formation sounded, no cadence, just the soft hum of barracks generators and the distant clank of early shift. Gear checks echoing across the concrete. She had stood here before, 20 years earlier, nervous but steady, watching the same light stretch across the same trees. It looked no different now, but everything else had changed. Then, she had believed in clean answers, in chains of command that held firm. Now, she knew better. Orders were just structure. Integrity had to come from somewhere deeper. She thought of Wilson, still in country when the Delphi op fell apart, never made it back. His name carved into a granite wall near the chapel. She thought of Donovan, who never blinked when she asked for a key code that could have gotten him, court-martialed, and of Elijah, who'd faked his death for a cause and come back for one reason. Not duty, not orders. None of them had asked for this kind of war, the kind without uniforms or front lines, the kind where the enemy wore the same rank and saluted the same flag. It had nearly destroyed her, but it hadn't. Not fully. The reinstatement hadn't felt like a victory. It felt like clearance to keep fighting, like being handed a weapon you already knew how to use. The commendations meant less than the drive that sat locked in her new field. HQ, the one with names that still hadn't surfaced, they would, eventually. A young cadet passed behind her, not recognizing her out of uniform. He walked with that same sharp pace she remembered from her own training days. She didn't turn. She just listened. That rhythm was still the same. At 06:17, the flag went up on the main pole. She watched it rise without sound. No anthem, no crowd, just a rectangle of fabric against a waking sky. It looked smaller from here, less like a symbol, more like a reminder. What mattered wasn't ceremony. It wasn't praise. It was the line you held when no one watched, when following orders would have been easier than asking questions. When silence protected careers but cost lives, she would serve again, but on her terms now. Not out of pride, not even out of justice, but because someone had to, and this time she wouldn't walk into the fire alone. Not ever again. The wind picked up. Not cold, just sharp. She breathed it in, steady and even, then turned and walked toward the command path. Boots striking with calm certainty on the asphalt. Not triumphant. Just returned. Ready. Because the truth of service wasn't about being followed. It was about knowing when to stand still. When everything around you moves. And when it does, you just hold until others remember what right looks like and follow.